Chrome has dominated the browser market for so long that calling it dead feels like clickbait. The actual market share numbers do not support the claim in a literal sense. Chrome still has roughly 48% of the global desktop browser market as of the first quarter of 2026. That is still the largest share of any browser. But the trend lines over the last 3 years, combined with specific developments in 2025 and 2026, tell a story that goes beyond the current numbers, and the story has a clear direction. Chrome is losing ground. The browser that is replacing it as the top recommendation of privacy-focused users, journalists, security researchers, and the kinds of influential users whose choices tend to shape the market is one that, 5 years ago, most people had never heard of. The browser is now the top privacy-focused browser by most meaningful measures. And the fact that it has taken this position, despite facing a competitor with the resources and momentum of Google, is worth understanding. I want to walk you through what has happened, why it has happened, and what it means for the direction of the web. The browser I am talking about is LibreWolf. You may not have heard of it. That is part of the point. LibreWolf is a fork of Firefox that has been quietly gaining adoption among users who found Firefox's privacy defaults insufficient and found Brave's commercial model uncomfortable. It is developed by a small, open-source community, entirely free, with no commercial backing, no advertising, no cryptocurrency integration, no user tracking, and no telemetry of any kind. It ships configured for privacy out of the box, with settings that Firefox power users typically apply manually after installation. It includes, by default, uBlock Origin as an integrated component. It strips out the telemetry mechanisms that Mozilla includes in Firefox, even in the versions that have been substantially hardened. And it is available on Windows, macOS, and Linux. For users who have been following the browser privacy conversation, LibreWolf represents something important. It is the browser you would build if you started from scratch with the goal of user privacy as the only priority. Firefox, historically, has balanced privacy with other considerations, including Mozilla's commercial relationships and the need to ship a product that works for the mass market. Brave, historically, has balanced privacy with its own commercial goals, including its cryptocurrency platform and its optional advertising system. LibreWolf has no commercial goals. It is an expression of what a privacy-focused browser looks like when the only concern is user privacy. The consequences of this purity are both positive and negative. On the positive side, LibreWolf's privacy defaults are stronger than those of any major browser. Tracking protection is set to the strictest level by default. Third-party cookies are blocked. JavaScript can be disabled per site easily. DNS over HTTPS is configured. The browser does not make network connections to any server, other than those the user explicitly requests. Opening the browser for the first time does not result in connections to Mozilla's update servers, to any analytics service, or to any advertising partner. The browser starts in a privacy-clean state and maintains that state unless the user explicitly changes it. On the negative side, LibreWolf's strict defaults break some websites. Sites that rely on third-party cookies for legitimate functionality, like federated authentication or embedded media, can fail in ways that require the user to explicitly grant exceptions. Some sites that use aggressive tracking in ways the user might tolerate for specific use cases cannot work without manual configuration. The user experience, for users who are accustomed to browsers that just work, can require more active engagement than the mainstream alternatives. This is the core tension of privacy-focused software. Strict privacy defaults mean strict rules about what the software is willing to do. Strict rules mean that some use cases require manual intervention. The user who values privacy is willing to accept this cost. The user who values convenience may not. LibreWolf's audience is the first group. The growth of LibreWolf has been concentrated in specific communities. Journalists, security researchers, activists, privacy advocates, and technically sophisticated users who had already been running modified Firefox profiles now have a pre-configured option that saves them the manual work. Open source communities have adopted it heavily, both because it aligns with open source values and because it is distributed through the same channels that open source users trust. The distribution data for LibreWolf, while not as comprehensive as for commercial browsers, shows growth that tracks the broader pattern of users leaving Chrome. Downloads have grown substantially over the last 2 years. Active user base. Numbers, estimated through Mozilla Foundation reporting on LibreWolf's Origin Firefox build channels, are in the low millions and rising. Now, let me address the question of whether calling Chrome dead is fair. It is not literally accurate, but it captures a real shift. The social status of Chrome as the recommended browser has eroded significantly. In technology-focused publications, in security communities, in privacy advocacy groups, and in the circles of users whose recommendations ripple through their personal networks, Chrome is no longer the safe recommendation. 5 years ago, recommending Chrome was the default. Today, recommending Chrome without specific qualifications is, in many of these communities, out of step with the consensus. What has replaced the default recommendation is a more nuanced landscape. For users who want a privacy-respecting browser that looks and feels familiar, Firefox is the typical starting point. For users who want a Chromium-based browser with better privacy than Chrome, Brave is the usual recommendation. For users who want the maximum privacy posture possible in a browser, LibreWolf has become the recommendation, particularly in security and activist circles. Chrome is, for these audiences, no longer a recommendation. It is, at best, a fallback for specific use cases where other browsers have gaps. The reasons for this shift have accumulated over years. Chrome's continued scandals about data handling, Google's push for the privacy sandbox, which critics characterized as surveillance by another name, the antitrust proceedings against Google, the broader cultural shift towards skepticism of large technology companies, the emergence of viable alternatives that did not exist as polished products 5 years ago. Each of these factors, individually, would not be enough to shift the consensus. Together, they have. For users who are considering their own browser choices, the practical question is what to do. My recommendations depend on the user's specific needs. For users whose top priority is privacy, LibreWolf is the best available choice. The learning curve is minimal, the privacy benefits are substantial, and the browser is stable and reliable for the majority of websites. Some sites require exceptions, but the mechanism for granting them is straightforward. If you value privacy enough to accept a small amount of friction, LibreWolf is excellent. For users whose top priority is privacy, but who want something more polished, Firefox with privacy-focused configuration is very good. Download Firefox, install the uBlock Origin extension, enable enhanced tracking protection in strict mode, configure privacy-oriented settings, and you have a browser that is roughly comparable to LibreWolf with more active development and broader compatibility. For users who want a browser that blocks ads aggressively by default without requiring extensions, Brave is a strong choice. The crypto features can be ignored, and the privacy posture is significantly better than Chrome. The underlying Chromium engine means that all Chrome extensions work, which is convenient for users who rely on specific extensions. For users who have specific reasons to use Chrome, including work requirements or dependencies on specific Chrome features, Chrome can still be used with privacy-focused configuration. Turn off sync. Install uBlock Origin. Configure privacy settings. It will not match the privacy of the alternatives, but it can be made meaningfully better than the default Chrome installation. For users who do not particularly care about privacy but value convenience, Chrome is still a reasonable choice. It is fast, well-maintained, and works with essentially every website. The privacy concerns matter only if you consider them to matter, and for users who do not, the defaults are what they are. The broader point I want to make is that the browser market has, in a meaningful sense, reopened. For more than a decade, the default recommendation was Chrome, and the default for any browser recommendation in technology culture was Chrome. That is no longer true. Multiple credible alternatives exist, each with its own trade-offs and its own audience. The user who was comfortable accepting the default for a decade now had to think more carefully about which browser to use, and that thinking is actually good for the long-term health of the web. A web with 5 credible browser options, each with different priorities, is healthier than a web with one dominant browser that gets to shape standards unilaterally. The more users distribute themselves across browsers, the more leverage the community has. to push back against decisions that benefit one company at the expense of users. Chrome's dominance was, in important ways, bad for the web. The slow erosion of that dominance is correspondingly good. LibreWolf is one of the more interesting beneficiaries of this shift. Its existence demonstrates that a small open-source community can produce a browser that competes in specific dimensions with browsers produced by well-funded commercial entities. That demonstration matters for the open-source ecosystem more broadly. It is evidence that the model works for consumer-facing software, not just for infrastructure. The more examples we have of this, the more confidence builds that similar projects can succeed in other categories. Whether LibreWolf specifically becomes a mass-market browser remains to be seen. It may not. Its audience may remain a focused community of privacy-conscious users. But the category it represents, the category of user-first, commercially independent, open-source consumer software, is, in 2026, more credible than it was a decade ago. That credibility has consequences that extend beyond any single product. Subscribe for the next video, which is a hands-on walkthrough of setting up LibreWolf, configuring it for your specific use cases, and migrating from Chrome or Firefox without losing your data. And in the comments, tell me which browser you are using today, and whether you are considering a switch. The story of where the browser market goes from here is still being written, and the decisions of viewers of this channel are, cumulatively, part of the story.